2 out of 3 biological explanations of OCD: neuroanatomical explanations and biochemical explanations. Neuroanatomical explanations of OCD. Genetic factors might work by influencing the brain structure. A structural dysfunction in the central nervous system, CNS, underlies OCD. Orbitofrontal cortex and structures in the basal ganglia are implicated. It makes sense if you think about it. If you're going to talk about the structure of the brain, there will be some sort of genetic link there. Basically, your genes determine how you are built. They determine how you are made. They are the blueprint for you. Obviously, the environment plays a role. You could have the genes to be a top athlete because your parents were both top athletes, but if you don't get the training, you don't get the diet, and you're not in an environment that supports that, then obviously you will not reach your genetic potential. But if we're going to talk about obsessive compulsive disorder, if you have two people with very similar brains and their orbitofrontal cortex and their basal ganglia are affected in the same way, we would expect to see obsessive compulsive disorder, obviously, if this is correct. So the orbitofrontal cortex, the OFC, as you can see, is just behind the eyes here in the front of the brain, and the basal ganglia is more in the center of the brain, and this caudate nucleus is the curly part, like the top of the shell that goes around. So basically what happens is information comes in, sensory information through your ears, your eyes, touch, wherever. And when this information comes in, it is transformed into thoughts and actions. Now, obviously, as the impulse comes in, what the role of the OFC and the BG is to do is to filter out anything that's unimportant. Only the important is meant to be passed to the thalamus and then be acted upon. Now, obviously, if you've got an obsessive compulsive disorder, what's happening is that there is some problem with that filtering system and everything is getting through. This is the theory. There's a problem with the OFC or there's a problem with the BG, and what's happening is that all of these impulses are coming through and feel like they must be acted on as opposed to being filtered out and then ignored. So, neuroanatomical explanations of OCD. There is evidence of basal ganglia involvement, and with therapies, psychosurgery can reduce symptoms, but you'll look at the therapies later. So Lambert and Kinsley, 2005, found that damage to the OFC and the BG meant that inappropriate impulses could not be suppressed, and this led to patients being overwhelmed and obviously having their obsessions and compulsions. Wise and Rappaport in 1989 found comorbidity between OCD and BG impairment. Now, BG impairment can be caused by Parkinson's, Tourette's, Huntington's. If you don't know what these diseases and conditions are, then please do look them up. But basically, they do affect the basal ganglia, and because that has been impaired, that structure in the brain has been impaired, they generally find a high comorbidity of OCD with those patients. Coetzer in 2004 found that the OFC or BG being impaired due to brain damage can give rise to OCD, but obviously that's not the full story, because you get lots of patients that, lots of people with obsessive compulsive disorder that do not have damage or impairment to the orbitofrontal cortex or the basal ganglia, the OFC or the BG. Piggott et al. In 1996, they used brain scanning. Now, this uses neuroimaging, so they can actually look at the basal ganglia as it's working, which is really cool. Okay, but basically it was encouraging. They did see some correlation, but the basal ganglia impairment was not always found in OCD compared to controls. It wasn't statistically significant. Now, Rappaport et al. In 1994, they used psychosurgery to disconnect the orbitofrontal cortex and the basal ganglia, and this actually reduces symptoms in severe cases of OCD. Menzies et al. 2007. They used MRI, which showed there was less grey matter in the orbitofrontal cortex and more in the cingulated regions for obsessive compulsive disorder sufferers. Now, he was looking for an endophenotype for OCD, and that's what he believes he's found, which basically an endophenotype is the expression of your genotype. Now, your genotype is obviously the mixture of genes that you get as a result of your mum and dad getting together and creating you. Now, they're your genes, but obviously we can't see your genes. What we see is the expression of those genes. So I can't see that you've got dominant alleles or recessive alleles for your eye color, but what I can see is your eye color. And what he's saying is that I can't see what genes they've got for their brain structures, but what I can see is their brain structure. I can see that these brain structures are working correctly or incorrectly, or there is more grey matter or less grey matter, and therefore I can link that to obsessive compulsive disorder. Symptoms of obsessive compulsive disorder can be relieved using SSRIs, that's selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. These are thought to inhibit OFC activity. Biochemical explanations of OCD. OCD results from a deficiency of the neurotransmitter serotonin, or a malfunction in serotonin metabolism. Serotonin acts as a neuromodulator, regulates other neurotransmitters. Okay, well, the theory about serotonin is that it's possibly a deficiency of serotonin, which is obviously a neurotransmitter, or there is a malfunction in the processing of it, in the metabolism of it. So if you can see on the right, what I've got here is a picture of a nerve and another nerve, and between the two nerves what you have is this gap called a synapse. Now what happens is these vesicles containing the neurotransmitter, in this case serotonin, come to the end of one nerve, and they're basically released into this synapse, and then they join with the next nerve. They're accepted or received by the next nerve. Now what serotonin reuptake inhibitors do is actually block any of that serotonin, that neurotransmitter, coming back into the first nerve that released it. So what that basically does, it stops it being reuptaken, it stops it being taken back up, and then that means that there's more serotonin available for the receptor sites, and therefore that solves this problem of a deficiency or the malfunction. Now OCD is relieved by antidepressants, and these work in a similar way of increasing serotonin. It's unclear whether serotonin is the whole picture, or whether it's just what's known as a neuromodulator. Now Lambert and Kinsley, 2005, found that other neurotransmitters like glutamate, GABA and dopamine also had the effect of reducing symptoms in OCD sufferers. So what it is possible that serotonin actually acts as a neuromodulator, which allows all of these other neurotransmitters to function well as well. And that would explain why serotonin is so effective. Biochemical explanations of OCD. The success of medication that inhibits reuptake of serotonin has given a lot of weight to these explanations of OCD. Okay, Insel in 1991 and Zohar et al. In 1996 showed that using medication preventing the reuptake of serotonin was beneficial for up to 60% of OCD patients. Lydiard, 1996, said that, however, only partial alleviation of symptoms was experienced by the patients, and there was a relapse as soon as the medication stopped, so it was not a cure. So obviously Lydiard is evidence against, it's a weakness in the explanation. The other big weakness is that all of this information is correlational. It's not, we don't know whether it's cause or effect of OCD. Is it that OCD causes changes to the orbitofrontal cortex or basal ganglia, or is it that changes in those structures actually leads to OCD? Is it that OCD leads to serotonin levels dropping, or is it that serotonin levels dropping leads to OCD? We don't know, it's just a correlation. So it's not the whole picture, okay, but these are the explanations that you asked me to go over, and hopefully you've got a better understanding of them now.